Hi, people. So I want to say something in this story involving Dominic Raab and allegations of bullying against him. Um, I honestly am somewhere in the middle with this one. I specifically got coverage from both sides. That is, those critical of Raab and those who go with his narrative that it's a kind of political nation, so to speak. Um, so I've got, I'm just going to keep the papers together here. See, we've got the Daily Express, which of course you can see their headline: "Forced out for wanting best for Britain." So it's pretty obvious where they lie with it. The Eye, RAB officials angry at tone deaf resignation. So very different. I'll try and get the picture up there. Try and keep these together so it's not all. So, very different takes on this. I've been reading this quite extensively, so there's a lot to say, but I'll try and keep it as condensed as possible. Because really, I think you just got a good shot of my mouth there, just leaning over and trying to keep everything together. Um, my first instinct with something like this is we just don't know. The public, people looking into this just don't know. But interestingly, the Daily Express had a "What Do You Think" segment, and it was mixed opinions. But pretty much everyone they asked seemed to be older people. There's nobody they've asked that is under the age of 50, and I'm not saying that's particularly significant, but there may be a generational thing there. Like literally, I think the youngest person 48, yeah, but just I don't know. I'm not saying that's particularly relevant, but just notable. Um, so I'm going to start with the Express and point out some of the things that this inquiry found. The inquiry was conducted by one. Mr. Tolley QC Casey, I should say. Um, and this is it was an independent inquiry. And um, this is what I found. Let me just get up. Yeah, report: Minister was unreasonably aggressive, but he did not intend to be threatening. Here are the key allegations in a 48-page report by Adam Tolley KC and the ones which were upheld. Okay, so this is what the 48-page report found. Disciplinary threat: An alleged threat by Mr. Raab had a significant adverse effect on a worker at the Foreign Office. He was said to have suggested those involved in a project breached the Civil Service Code, and senior diplomat Sir Philip Barton claimed he had a private meeting with Mr. Raab to warn him not to threaten staff this way. Mr. Raab disputed that the meeting took place, finding Mr. Raab conveyed a threat and should have known his reference to the code would be perceived as such. He did not intend to threaten anyone with disciplinary action but should have acted differently. Banging tables and hand waving. Mr. Raab's physical gestures were allegedly used threateningly. Loud banging on tables and finger pointing were among examples cited. He was also said to have extended a hand towards a person's face to stop him talking. There was scope for misunderstanding. Mr. Raab had not intended to be threatening, intimidating meetings. While at the Ministry of Justice, Mr. Raab was said to have complained of a lack of the basics while also being insulting and intimidating in a number of meetings. Finding: Complaint upheld. Mr. Raab was unreasonable and persistently aggressive. His own fairly personal criticism was likely to humiliate. Perverse culture of fear. Second complaint at the Ministry of Justice described a perverse culture of fear and unfair work deadlines. Finding: Staff had no ulterior agenda, but the nature of the evidence made ground for a finding of fact unsuitable. Shouting and swearing. Mr. Raab was not found to have shouted or sworn at colleagues. I think that part's quite important actually, because if you have a behaviour pattern of someone who's bullying, um, swearing naturally comes into that. You get this image of someone kind of getting in people's faces and shouting, and um, swearing naturally comes into that. Now, if he wasn't found to have ever sweared, this would be more in line with his reportedly high, tough standards as opposed to intended bullying and targeting people. Leo McKinstry in the Express, hounded out of office by Whitehall staff. I'm not going to read out the whole piece, but that's his take. Let's see. Out in the eye, I'm just trying to sort of pick out some aspects of this from both angles. It's too extensive to read out everything, but Jane Merrick, she's policy editor of the Eye newspaper. After months of investigation, briefing, and speculation about his behaviour toward civil servants, it can finally be said Dominic Raab is a bully. Adam Tolley KC, who conducted an extensive and detailed inquiry into 8 allegations of bullying during Mr. Raab's time in office, time in charge of 3 departments, upheld 2 of them in relation to when he was Foreign Secretary and Justice Secretary. Mr. Raab, in a comment piece for the Daily Telegraph published before the report was released, still denies he is a bully. He says Mr. Tolley does not conclude that his behaviour was intentional, which he claims is a legal requirement under the definition of bullying. In his resignation letter, Mr. Raab said that in setting the bar for bullying so low, this inquiry has set a dangerous precedent. And the Express also says that it's God help the next minister that stands up to civil servants is the angle that they're taking with it. Yet what Mr. Raab fails to say, but must be pointed out, is that Mr. Tolley's bar for bullying was set by the High Court in 2021 when it made ruling on the ministerial code. That ruling stated that the definition for bullying for the purpose of the ministerial code under which Mr. Raab was bound is characterised as offensive, intimidating, malicious or insulting behaviour or abuse or misuse of power in ways that undermine, humiliate, denigrate or injure the recipient. Rishi Sunak himself, Mr. Tolley says, was content to adopt this approach to bullying. Mr. Raab says Mr. Tolley concluded he had not once in 4.5 years sworn or shouted at anyone, let alone thrown anything or otherwise physically intimidated anyone, nor intentionally sought to belittle anyone. But as Mr. Tolley notes, former Prime Ministerial Independent Advisor on Ethics Sir Alex Allen, in his report into whether Priti Patel bullied staff, stated that while legitimate, reasonable and constructive criticism of a worker's performance will not amount to bullying, any conduct defined as intimidating or insulting behaviour that makes an individual feel uncomfortable, frightened, less respected, or put down does so. In short, bullying does not need to manifest itself as throwing things or physical intimidation. That's the take by Jim Merrick. Raab has went of his own accord. He done what he said he would do, which is that if the report in any way found that um, he had been guilty of any of these charges, that he would leave, and he's done that before Sunak sacked him. Some have said that Sunak hung on for too long and should have sacked him immediately or much sooner, and it prolongs the wait for those making the allegations. Um, he's not the first high-profile politician to come under these claims, of course. Priti Patel in recent years, and going back over a decade, Gordon Brown himself, right up to the Prime Minister, as Brown then was. Um, I've mixed views. I mean, my whole life I've been against bullying. I think it can absolutely damage morale. It can make a workplace very unpleasant, and there's no justification for it. But here's the problem. I do feel that bullying itself is a term, a bit like sexism and racism, that's somewhat been weaponized, especially racism. So who gets to define it? I mean, this take basically, let's see what Jim America said. Any conduct defined as intimidating or insulting behaviour that makes an individual feel uncomfortable, frightened, disrespected, or put down also. The problem is, if you have someone interpreting bullying just because they say, I feel bullied, does that mean it is so? I mean, if you have someone who is naturally sensitive, I'm just putting this out there, and, a powerful person raises a voice at them, does that make it bullying? I mean, does Dominic Raab raising his voice amount to bullying? Apparently, in one case, he put up his hand during a meeting, and that was what was construed as bullying. Bullying. Now, to me, bullying is getting in someone's face. It's consistently putting them down. It's consistently making them feel powerless. Now, Raab himself has said this: the complaint from junior staff were not upheld, which indicates it's because we imagine this power dynamic in bullying. You know, so I think the truth is probably somewhere in the middle. I think probably some of Rab's methods, are not very constructive. But I do think there may be some truth in what he's saying, that the blob, I don't think he said this himself, but his allies have made this point. This term coined by Michael Gove, the blob, that is activist civil servants, a term that Raab did use, basically are out to get him. Now, Dominic Raab's been a controversial politician. He has often, stirred, ruffled feathers. His take on feminism, his take on taking the knee. He hasn't been afraid to speak out against woke ideology, not the only Tory to do so. Um, but he's been somewhat unconventional in that sense. I do think this will be one of those things that is partisan because there will be a lot of people on the left welcoming this for no other reason than Dominic Raab is a senior Tory. And he has been. I mean, he's been Deputy Prime Minister, Justice Secretary, Foreign Secretary. Um, let's look at his political record. As Foreign Secretary, he got a lot of heat for his handling of the Taliban takeover of Afghanistan, and maybe some of that critique was deserved. Maybe he did fail in that role. As Justice Secretary, I personally believe he was one of our better Justice Secretaries of recent years. As an example, he has given victims of crime more say in parole hearings. That's a very good thing. Televised verdicts is bringing some more spotlight to the role of judges. That's a good thing. But I've long believed that no single Justice Secretary, that post has now been taken over by Alex Chalk, who I don't really know anything about, but no single Justice Secretary can get everything done. But there is aspects of this that need to be looked at. Civil servants are not elected. Dominic Raab, as a parliamentarian, is. Now, those civil servants have to constantly be aware that when they're in a department, they are ultimately serving the British public. And one can't help but feel there is a little bit of, you think of that series, Yes, Prime Minister. It was a comedy, obviously, but Jim Hacker, what he had to put up with Sir Humphreys and others. I do think that there are people in the civil service who are willfully obstructive to ministers and basically interpret high standards and targets as bullying. And I do think this term could be thrown around. Now, I understand that some of these staff had to have counselling, and there were 8 individual complainants whilst others support them. So there may be something in that. And I think there are people on the right defending Raab who are shooting from the hip a little bit, in the sense that, I mean, Dan Wootton on GB News and others are saying, well, it's just a bunch of snowflakes. I don't agree with that. I think that is another term that's overused. Bullying is perhaps weaponized. So it's snowflake. If someone is genuinely feeling uncomfortable and genuinely feeling so uncomfortable to the point where they're getting a therapist, that's no trivial thing. Um, But I do think if you're working in Whitehall, if you're working in the corridors of power, whether as an elected parliamentarian or a civil servant, frankly, you need tough skin. It's a tough environment, and it needs to be because it's involving decisions that affect millions of people. I mean, in the Department of Justice, these are decisions that directly affect victims of crime. So I think those civil servants should understand that the Secretary of State in charge of that department is naturally going to want to deliver to the public. So, if they don't expect any sort of pressure or any sort of demands from the Secretary of State, that's just unrealistic. But having said that, if Raab has conducted himself in a way that is aggressive, or if based on what's been upheld, then maybe he should have won. I mean, it goes without saying, it's just common sense. If there's a unpleasant atmosphere, the productivity is going to be less. Now, the issue of bullying and how it's defined, I think Leo McKinstry also pointed it out. Churchill, if we look at how Churchill conducted himself often, he would say to be quite abrasive, very rude. Um, and actually quite difficult to work with on a personal basis. The next day Churchill was forced to resign for bullying by today's standards. Well, he wouldn't have been Prime Minister during World War II. And then let's think about the outcome. So I think that, you know, civil servants should expect that senior politicians are going to have high demands. How else are they going to get things done? This idea that, they need to sort of gently say, can you please do this? Can you, it's, I don't really go along with that. But I think the issue here is people are just, we can only go by what's in the report. Too many people are being partisan on this. They're either saying that it is sort of a woke agenda to bring Rab down because, I mean, this is the angle that Dan Woodson was taking. He was a leaver. He stood up to woke ideology, so therefore he's a target. But I do think that both sides are jumping to conclusions with this. The truth is, we cannot be absolutely sure what has went on in the corridors of power. The only people who know exactly what happened is Dominic Raab and the civil servants who've made allegations against him. Now, I've been bullied myself, and I know what that's like. I mean, actual, really personalised bullying. Really, really trying to tear me down. I know what that's like, and most people probably, or a lot of people at some point in their life will have experienced that. So people just saying they're a bunch of snowflakes should maybe have a little bit more empathy, just a little. But I do think if you are experiencing a really unpleasant environment, I think you should make complaints at a time to the appropriate party, and I think the procedure should be in place to, make it easy to do that at the time. But I think questions will be raised as when people bottle things up. Um, but there's a lot of aspects to this that raise more questions than answers. I mean, for example, Dominic Raab was allowed to see the report, but the complainants were not. The findings of the report, that's a little bit iffy. Um, why does he get to see it, but the complainants don't? Um, the fact that he called for the inquiry, maybe that shows that he has a clean conscience, or maybe it shows he's arrogant and he thought he would get off the hook. Who knows? I think when you look into this, there's a lot more conjecture than answers, and that's part of the problem. I abhor abuse of power and I abhor actual bullying, but I do think it would be a problem if, as Rab says, the bar was set so low that every time a minister has high demands or, expected results, then they were accused of bullying, or even if they raised their voice. It's a demanding job, and, Dominic Raab's a human being, believe it or not. I'm thinking of his left wing critics. He's human. There's going to be days where he will, maybe lose his temper. Um, that only makes him human. But if it's a consistent pattern of abuse, if it's a consistent pattern where he's, running down people who are not in a position to answer back, then I would say that's bullying. I mean, to me, when I think bullying, I think basically Gordon Ramsay. That sort of approach, yelling in people's faces, demeaning them. I've never liked Gordon Ramsay. I've never liked that whole, people say, I use that as an example because people say, oh, but he's one of the world's top chefs and he expects results and he gets results and he's a I don't accept that. I don't accept that you need to be utterly obnoxious and get in people's faces to get good results. I think that's, I think that's an excuse. I think you can have high demands and targets and expectations without being utterly obnoxious. Now, from what we know of the Dominic Raab saga, he has been hardwired. He's been demanding, but some of these things are vaguely defined, and I think that's a problem. Something like this, there has to be specific details. It cannot just be he was intimidating. Well, what does that mean? Okay, because how one person interprets that, someone else could interpret it a different way. I think it's very important with something like this to be very specific what it means. Um, so, I do not want to be sort of this reactionary, on the reactionary camp of saying, oh, it's all just one big left wing plot. Because I think probably there are, bullying can exist where there is power. But the term is thrown around, and I don't think it should be that every time a minister loses their temper or they have high demands, that's translated as bullying. Frankly, those civil servants do need tougher skin if that is the case, because ultimately they're working for the public, should be. And unlike the minister, they're not elected. So, the minister knows that he or she has to be accountable to the public. And that's something that has to be taken into account here. It's the minister who faces judgment at the ballot box. Civil servants don't have to. So this may be a case that ministers are going up against a very powerful bureaucracy. If we want to talk about power, maybe the real power is with the blob. This is this big um, bureaucracy of civil servants, lawyers, and activists. Maybe there is something in that. And I do wonder sometimes when we see, when the public get immensely frustrated, things are not being done. Is it civil servants stuck in the way who don't really live in the real world, who are not, they don't have to face the public at the ballot box, and they're maybe putting up barriers against ministers getting things done? Maybe there is something in that. I don't know. But Raab said, he's done what he said he would do. Um, I'm not going to go out of my way to defend him because I don't know what it's like to work for him. Maybe he's a very difficult person, and in interviews he always comes across as fairly polished and polite and diplomatic, a seasoned politician. Maybe behind closed doors he is obnoxious. Maybe. I just don't know, and I don't think anyone knows. The only people who know is Dominic Raab and those who have accused him. So let me know your thoughts. I'm honestly somewhere in the middle. I think if he is a bully, there will be a lot of people breathing a sigh of relief. But if this is a term that has been weaponized against him simply because he has high demands, then it's the public that lose out. Why? Because future ministers are going to tread very carefully lest they be accused of bullying. And therefore, the standards drop because um, there isn't the same expectations and demands of civil servants. So I don't know. I just feel I will say this though, I don't think terms like snowflake are particularly helpful. These are serious allegations, and just dismissing complainants as snowflakes is a bit. It's utterly lacking any attempt at empathy. It's not even a case of, well, you're right, but you know I don't agree with that sort of language. But at the same time, I think there may be something in this being a little bit of a, like, people who will be welcoming this most will definitely be left wing people who just want to see Rab brought down because he's a senior Tory. I mean, Angela Rayner and Keir Starmer were all over it. Well, of course they would be. They're playing politics. And Angela Rayner is hardly in a position to talk about respect and civility, coming from a woman that called her opponent scum. So, she should tread carefully about calling people bullies. Let me know your thoughts.